Elena Vasquez walked through the massive halls of the council chamber on Nexus Prime. The walls stretched up so high that she could barely see the ceiling. Alien voices echoed around her in hundreds of different languages. Some sounded like music, others like machines grinding metal. A few made no sound at all and spoke directly into minds. She had been coming to these halls for 15 years. As the human ambassador, Elena represented her people in the Great Galactic Harmony Council. 847 different species worked together here. They had been keeping peace across 12 sectors of space for over 1,000 years. Elena stopped at her desk and looked at the morning reports. Bad news, as usual. The Keth Empire was moving warships near Zephyrian space again. Their massive fleet had been growing for months. The Zephyrians were scared and asking for help. Elena could see the pattern forming. She had seen it before with other species. Small arguments became big fights. Big fights became wars. Wars became disasters that killed billions. She picked up her tablet and started typing a message to the council leaders. They needed to act now before things got worse. But she already knew what would happen. They would say she was worrying too much. They always did. The first council meeting of the day started at 10. Elena took her seat in the human section. It was much smaller than the areas for the older species. The archivists had a whole platform that looked like a library. The ethereals floated in glowing pods above everyone else. The Nexari sat at desks covered with blinking computers and screens. Humans got 12 chairs in a corner. Chairman Zorthik called the meeting to start. He was an ethereal, which meant he looked like a tall, thin person made of silver light. When he spoke, his voice appeared directly in everyone's mind. It felt cold and clean, like touching ice. Today we discussed trade routes in Sector 7, Zorthik announced. The Mineral Guild requests new shipping lanes through Keth space. Elena raised her hand. Chairman, I need to speak about the fleet movements near Zephyrian space. This is urgent. Several council members made noises that meant annoyance in their languages. Zorthik's mental voice carried a feeling of being tired. Ambassador Vasquez, we have a schedule. Your concerns can wait. Sir, the Keth have moved 50 warships to the border. The Zephyrians think this is a threat. If we don't talk to both sides now, the Keth have every right to move their ships in their own space. Interrupted Counselor Vex High of the Archivists. She looked like a giant spider made of crystal, and her voice sounded like wind through caves. Historical records show that fleet movements are common. There is no cause for concern. Elena felt frustrated but kept her voice calm. History also shows that border tensions lead to conflicts. In the past 50 years, we've prevented 12 wars by talking to both sides early. The patterns are clear. Patterns, said Nexari Counselor Unit 7745. Its mechanical voice buzzed with electronic static. Humans see patterns where none exist. Statistical analysis shows only 0.3% probability of conflict. Elena wanted to scream. The Nexari always talked about math and numbers, but they never understood feelings or fear or pride. The archivists only cared about old records. The ethereals thought they were too smart to make mistakes. None of them understood how real people worked. That was what humans did. They understood people. Elena had learned to speak 37 languages. Not just the words, but what they meant. She knew that when a Keth warrior clicked his claws 3 times, he was angry about honor. She knew that Zephyrian song speech got higher when they were scared for their children. She could tell when the insect-like hive minds were confused because they started moving in jerky patterns. The other council species thought this was just basic work. Anyone could learn languages, they said. Anyone could talk to aliens. But Elena knew better. She had seen what happened when species tried to talk without help. They misunderstood everything. They got angry over nothing. They made deals that sounded good, but made everyone unhappy later. Humans were different. They could feel what others needed. They could find ways to make everyone happy. Not because humans were smarter or stronger, but because they cared about making things work. The Keth fleet movement is not our concern today, Chairman Zorthek said with final authority. His mental voice felt like a door slamming shut. We will discuss trade routes. Ambassador Vasquez, please limit your comments to relevant matters. Elena sat back in her chair. Around her, the council talked about shipping lanes and cargo taxes. Important things, but not as important as the war that was coming. She could feel it building like a storm dot during the break. Elena walked to the Zephyrian section. Ambassador Harmony of Distant Stars saw her coming and sang a soft tune that meant relief and hope. The Zephyrian looked like a tall person made of colored glass, with light flowing through her body in musical patterns. Ambassador Elena, Harmony sang in words that sounded like water flowing over rocks. Have the council leaders heard our concerns? They're focused on other things, Elena said carefully. But I'm still working on it. Tell me about the Keth ships. What exactly are they doing? Harmony's light patterns turned darker blue, which meant fear. They practice war games near our research stations. They fly in attack formations. Our scientists are afraid to work. Some stations have been evacuated. Elena nodded. This was exactly what she had expected. The Keth were not just moving ships randomly. They were sending a message. But what did they really want? After the council session ended, Elena went to the Keth embassy. Ambassador Greshtok was a massive creature covered in black armor and metal spikes. He looked like a cross between a bear and a tank. When he spoke, it sounded like rocks falling down a mountain. Human? Greshtok growled when Elena entered his office. You waste my time. I want to understand the fleet movements, Elena said. The Zephyrians are scared. Is there something bothering your people? Greshtak's small red eyes glowed brighter. The Zephyrians take everything. They mine our ancient worlds. They ignore our sacred sites. They think their pretty songs make everything acceptable. Now Elena was getting somewhere. This wasn't really about territory or military power. This was about respect and history. The Zephyrians probably didn't even know they were being rude. Their culture was so different from Keth warrior traditions that they couldn't see the problem. Have you talked to them about the sacred sites? Elena asked. Talk? Greshtak's laugh sounded like an explosion. Zephyrians do not listen. They sing their songs and do what they want. The council does not care about Keth honor. Elena spent 2 more hours with Greshtak, learning about Keth history and the sites that mattered to them. Then she spent 3 hours with Harmony of Distant Stars, understanding Zephyrian mining needs and cultural practices. By evening, she had a solution. It would require some careful negotiation, but both sides could get what they needed. The Zephyrians could have their mining rights, and the Keth could have their sacred sites protected. Everyone would be happy. But first, she had to convince the council to listen. Elena looked out her window at the lights of Nexus Prime. Millions of beings from hundreds of worlds lived here in peace. The council had built something amazing. But it only worked because species could trust each other, talk to each other, and solve problems together. Tomorrow, she would try again to make them see the danger. She had to, because if the council failed to stop this conflict, everything they had built might fall apart. She just hoped they would listen before it was too late. The emergency alarm woke Elena at 3 in the morning. Red lights flashed in her apartment as her communication device screamed urgent warnings. She grabbed it with shaking hands and saw the message that made her stomach drop. Keth Patrol destroys Zephyrian research vessel. 17 scientists dead. Both sides mobilizing fleets. Elena was dressed and running to the council chambers within minutes. Emergency sessions meant that war was close. Very close. As she ran through empty hallways, she could see other ambassadors hurrying to the same place. But they moved slowly, like this was just another meeting. They didn't understand. War between the Keth Empire and the Zephyrian Collective wouldn't stay small. Both species had friends and allies. The Keth worked with 12 other warrior races. The Zephyrians had trade partnerships with 30 civilizations. If fighting started, it would spread across half the galaxy. Elena reached the council chamber and immediately asked for an emergency session. The night supervisor, a bored-looking Nexaria unit, checked its computer files. Request noted. Emergency sessions require approval from 3 senior counselors. Current estimated response time is 72 hours. 72 hours? Elena stared at the machine being. Ships are moving toward each other right now. In 72 hours, there could be a full war starting. Procedures must be followed, the Nexari replied with electronic calm. Please file your request in the proper format. Elena wanted to scream, but she knew it wouldn't help. She spent the next 4 hours filling out forms, sending messages to senior counselors, and trying to get someone to listen. By morning, she had managed to get a meeting scheduled for the next day. Not an emergency session, but at least something. When the council finally met, Elena was ready. She had spent the whole night preparing. She had maps showing ship movements, communication records from both sides, and a detailed plan for stopping the crisis. Chairman Zorthik called her to speak. Elena stood up and walked to the center of the chamber. Hundreds of alien eyes, sensors, and psychic minds focused on her. Council members, Elena began. We have perhaps 12 hours before ships start shooting at each other. But this war can still be stopped. I've spoken with both sides, and I know what each species really wants. She activated her holographic display. Images of space fleets and star systems appeared in the air above her head. The Keth are not angry about territory. They're angry about respect. The Zephyrians have been mining near sacred Keth burial worlds without permission. They didn't know these sites were sacred because no one told them. Elena changed the display to show her solution. The Zephyrians can keep mining, but they need to avoid 3 specific systems. In return, they get exclusive rights to rare crystal formations that the Keth don't care about. Both sides get what they need, and both sides feel respected. She looked around the chamber. Some counselors were paying attention, but many seemed bored or distracted. I've already talked to both ambassadors informally. They're willing to discuss this plan, but they need to hear it from the full council with official backing. Elena finished her presentation and waited. The chamber was quiet for a long moment. Then Chairman Zorthik's mental voice filled the air, cold and dismissive. Ambassador Vasquez, your solution is very human. You see simple emotional problems where complex political forces are at work. Several counselors made agreement sounds. Elena felt her heart sink, but she tried again. Sir, I've studied both cultures for years. I know how they think. This really is about honor and respect, not politics. Counselor Veshai of the Archivist spoke up, her crystal voice ringing like broken glass. Historical analysis shows that resource conflicts are never solved by appealing to emotion. The Keth Empire has been expanding for centuries. This is territorial aggression, not a cultural misunderstanding. The numbers support this conclusion. Added Nexari Unit 7745. Probability calculations show 97.4% chance that Keth actions are based on resource acquisition, not ceremonial concerns. Elena felt desperation growing in her chest. But I talked to them. I know what they said. Ambassador Greshtok specifically mentioned, what a Keth warrior says and what a Keth warrior means are often different things. Interrupted Counselor Threnks of the Mindweavers. Surely you understand that primitive species often hide their true intentions behind cultural claims. The word primitive hit Elena like a physical blow. She had heard it before, whispered in conversations when council members thought no humans were listening. To most of the galaxy, humanity was primitive, young, simple, not sophisticated enough to understand real politics. Elena tried one more time. Counselors, please. I've prevented conflicts like this before. In 2387, the Helix Wars almost started the same way. In 2391, the Trade Federation crisis. In 2394, Chairman Zorthic's mental voice cut through her words like a knife. The cold pressure of his telepathic power made everyone in the chamber feel uncomfortable. Perhaps, he said slowly, it is time we stop relying on a species that sees danger in every shadow. The chamber went completely silent. Elena could feel hundreds of alien minds turning to look at her, but she couldn't see their expressions clearly. Her vision seemed to blur at the edges. Zorthek continued, his mental voice growing stronger and more confident. The humans have served adequately as translators and cultural advisors. But their primitive anxiety serves no purpose in an enlightened galaxy. They see threats that do not exist. They panic about problems that sophisticated beings can solve through proper channels. Elena heard agreement sounds from around the chamber. Clicks, whistles, electronic beeps, and telepathic harmonics that all meant yes. The council was agreeing with him. I propose, Zorthik announced, that we suspend human voting rights in council decisions. They may remain as observers and translators, but they should not participate in actual governance. The vote happened quickly. Too quickly. Elena watched in numb shock as species after species agreed. The archivists voted yes because human concerns weren't supported by historical data. The Nexari voted yes because human decisions weren't based on logical calculations. The Ethereals voted yes because human minds were too emotional and confused. Even species that had worked closely with humans for decades voted yes. They trusted the elder races more than they trusted their human friends. When the counting finished, the result was clear. Humans would lose their voice in the council. They could stay and watch, but they couldn't speak or vote. They would be treated like children who might have interesting ideas, but shouldn't make important decisions. Alana stood in the center of the chamber as hundreds of alien beings stared at her. She had expected anger or sadness, but instead she felt something cold and hard forming in her chest. It was disappointment, but deeper than that. It was understanding. She had spent her adult life trying to help these beings understand each other. She had learned their languages, studied their cultures, and worked endless hours to prevent wars and solve problems. She had believed that they valued her work, even if they didn't appreciate it properly. But she had been wrong. They didn't see her as a partner or even a useful ally. They saw her as a servant who had gotten too bold. Elena gathered her papers and tablet from the presentation stand. The chamber was still quiet, waiting to see how she would react. Some counselors probably expected her to argue or plead for reconsideration. Instead, Elena simply nodded once to Chairman Zorthek. Very well, she said in a calm, clear voice that carried to every corner of the massive chamber. Thank you for clarifying humanity's position. She walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the silence. At the door, she turned back one last time. We'll be in touch, Elena said simply. Then she left. Behind her, the council began discussing their next agenda item. They had already forgotten about the human problem. They had more important things to worry about, like the proper procedures for handling the Kefzifrian crisis. Elena walked through the corridors of Nexus Prime for the last time as a council ambassador. In her mind, she was already planning what needed to be done. The humans had served faithfully for 3 centuries. They had prevented wars, solved trade disputes, and helped hundreds of species work together. They had done it because they believed in the Council's mission of peace and cooperation. But the Council had made their choice. They wanted the humans to be silent servants, not partners. Elena smiled grimly as she reached her apartment. If the Council wanted humans to be silent, then humans would be silent. Very silent indeed. Captain Maria Santos finished loading the last cargo container onto her ship, the Horizon Walker. It was a routine delivery of rare metals from the mining station on Kepler 442c to the manufacturing plants on New Geneva. She had been running this route for 8 years. It would be her last run. Maria sealed the cargo bay and walked to her ship's communication center. She sent her final delivery confirmation to the mining station, then filed her standard flight plan with traffic control. Everything looked normal and routine, but hidden in her personal files was a message that had arrived 3 days ago. It came from Elena Vasquez through secure human channels. The message was simple and clear. It's time to come home. Maria understood what that meant. She had been waiting for this message for years, hoping it would never come. Now that it was here, she felt sad but not surprised. The Council had finally pushed too far. As the Horizon Walker left orbit around Kepler 442c, Maria sent one more message. It went to her friend Teklin, a Zephyrian shipping coordinator who had worked with her for years. The message said, "Maria Santos retiring from shipping business. Thank you for years of good partnership. Good luck with future endeavors." Teklin would be confused by the sudden retirement, but he would find other ships to carry cargo. Maria's route would be filled by someone else within a week. The Galaxy shipping network would barely notice that one human captain had disappeared. But Maria wasn't the only one leaving. Dr. James Chun finished his last surgery at Mercy Hospital on Arcturus Station. His patient was a Keth warrior who had been injured in a training accident. The surgery took 6 hours, and it was probably the most complex operation that the hospital had ever seen. Dr. Chun had to be careful because Keth biology was very different from human biology. After the surgery, Dr. Chun checked on his other patients and finished his medical reports. He had worked at Mercy Hospital for 12 years. The hospital served 43 different alien species, and Dr. Chun was one of only 3 doctors who understood the medical needs of all of them. Tomorrow morning, the hospital would find his resignation letter on the head doctor's desk. It would thank everyone for their support and explain that he was returning to human space for family reasons. The letter would recommend several excellent alien doctors who could take over his work. What the letter wouldn't mention was that Dr. Chun was one of only 200 doctors in the galaxy who could perform cross-species surgery. His knowledge would be almost impossible to replace. Meanwhile, on a trade station near the Vegan Confederation, Sarah Kim was closing down her translation business. For 15 years, she had helped species communicate with each other when their languages were too different for standard translators to handle. Sarah specialized in emotional translation. Computers could translate words, but they couldn't translate feelings, cultural meanings, or unspoken messages. Sarah could tell when a hive mind was trying to be polite but felt insulted. She could explain why a Nexary's logical argument was accidentally offending an ethereal sense of dignity. Sarah's clients included trading companies, diplomatic missions, and research teams. Her work had prevented dozens of misunderstandings that could have become major incidents. She spent her last day sending polite messages to all her clients. Each message explained that she was closing her business and returning to human space. She recommended other translators who might be able to help, though she knew that none of them had her special skills. By evening, Sarah was gone. The pattern repeated across the galaxy. Humans were disappearing from jobs, schools, research stations, and diplomatic posts. They didn't make angry speeches or demand apologies. They didn't protest or file complaints. They simply finished their work and left out at the Council Academy on Centauri Prime. Professor Robert Hayes taught his last class on comparative cultural studies. His students included young beings from 30 different species who wanted to work in diplomacy or trade. Professor Hayes was famous for helping students understand how to work with species that thought very differently from their own. After class, Professor Hayes met with his teaching assistant, a brilliant young archival named Centaura. He told her that he was leaving to take a position at a human university. Centaura was shocked because Professor Hayes had never mentioned wanting to leave. "But sir," Centaura said, her crystal voice ringing with confusion, "you have tenure here. You have the best research facilities in the galaxy. Why would you leave for a primitive human school?" Professor Hayes smiled sadly. "Sometimes, Centaura, the best facilities don't matter if your work isn't valued." The Council Transport Authority noticed the first real sign of the human departure a week later. Traffic Coordinator Vex Thal was an Exari who managed shipping routes for an entire sector. When he ran his weekly efficiency reports, he found something strange. 16 shipping routes had been abandoned. All of them had been run by human captains. The routes connected species that had historical conflicts with each other, without human ships carrying cargo between them. Those species would have to either deal with each other directly or find much longer alternative routes. Vexthal filed a report with his supervisors, but they weren't worried. "Market forces will adjust," they said. "Other species will fill the empty routes." But other species didn't fill the routes. The Keth Empire refused to allow Zephyrian ships through their space. The Zephyrians wouldn't trade with anyone who was allied with the Keth. The hive minds had cultural restrictions about dealing with individualistic species without proper intermediaries. Within 2 weeks, cargo was backing up at shipping stations across 3 sectors. Prices began to rise as goods became harder to transport. On Nexus Prime, Chairman Zorthic was dealing with his own problems. The Keth-Zephyrian crisis had gotten worse instead of better. Despite the Council's sophisticated diplomatic procedures, both sides were angrier than before. The Keth felt insulted by the Council's formal negotiation style. The Zephyrians felt ignored because their cultural songs were dismissed as irrelevant. Zorthic decided to call Ambassador Elena Vasquez for advice. Despite his public comments about human anxiety, he had to admit that Elena understood alien psychology better than most beings. But when he contacted the human embassy, he found it empty. The building was clean and well-maintained. All the equipment was still there, neatly organized and properly shut down. There was even a polite note thanking the maintenance staff for their good work. But there were no humans anywhere. Zorthic sent mental inquiries to other council members. Had they seen any humans recently? When was the last time a human representative had attended a meeting? Slowly, the truth became clear. Humans had been disappearing from council space for 3 weeks. Not just Elena, but all of them. Human doctors, teachers, translators, traders, researchers, and technicians. They had all quietly vanished. The discovery worried Zorthic, but he didn't want to admit it publicly. Humans were just translators and cultural advisors. Surely their absence couldn't cause serious problems. Then the reports started coming in. The University of Galactic Sciences had lost half of their xenobiology professors. Medical stations across 12 systems were running short of doctors who could treat multiple species. Trade routes were shutting down because species couldn't communicate effectively without human intermediaries. Most seriously, 3 ongoing diplomatic crises had gotten completely out of control. Without human mediators to find creative solutions, traditional council methods were failing. Species were walking out of negotiations. Old OIs were starting to view each other with suspicion. Council of HFY brought the problem to Zorthic's attention during a private meeting. "Chairman," she said, her crystal voice carrying worry. The human departure is causing significant disruptions. Perhaps we should contact them and request their return. Zorthik's mental presence flickered with annoyance. The humans left because they were displeased with our decision. They are acting like children who didn't get their way. But the practical consequences are temporary, Zorthik interrupted. The galaxy functioned perfectly well before humans joined the council. We will adapt to their absence. Yet even as he spoke these words, Zorthik felt doubt creeping into his mind. He had received Alana's final message that morning. It was short and polite. Humanity thanks the Galactic Harmony Council for 3 centuries of cooperation. But the Council's decision, we are withdrawing to our original territories. We wish you well. The message bothered him because of what it didn't say. There were no demands for apology, no threats of consequences, no angry accusations. Just a simple statement of fact. Humans were leaving, and they weren't coming back. Zorthik looked out his window at the city below. Millions of beings from hundreds of worlds lived and worked together in peace. It was a beautiful sight that represented everything the council had achieved. But for the first time in his long life, Zorthik wondered if that peace was as strong as it looked. And deep in his mind, where no other ethereal could sense it, he felt the first tiny seed of doubt about what the council had done. The humans had left silently, just as they had served silently. Now the galaxy would find out what their silence really meant. The first major disaster happened on a Tuesday. The Keth Empire and the Zephyrian Collective had been arguing for 6 months. Without human mediators, every council attempt to solve their problem had made things worse. The Ethereals tried using telepathic pressure to force agreement, but the Keth saw this as a mental attack on their honor. The archivists quoted historical precedents, but the Zephyrians felt their unique situation was being ignored. The Nexari presented logical solutions that completely missed the emotional heart of the conflict. When Keth Admiral Threshmak finally ordered his fleet to destroy a Zephyrian mining platform, he wasn't thinking about territory or resources. He was thinking about the months of insults and disrespect from beings who claimed to be his superiors. The mining platform exploded in a ball of fire that could be seen from 3 star systems away. 400 Zephyrian workers died instantly. Within hours, both sides were mobilizing their full military forces. Chairman Zorthik called an emergency council session, but the Keth and Zephyrian ambassadors refused to attend the same meeting. For the first time in council history, they had to hold separate sessions to even talk to the warring parties. This is a temporary setback, Zorthik told his advisors after the failed meetings. Once both sides see the costs of war, they will return to negotiations. But the war didn't stay between just 2 species. The Keth had military alliances with 12 warrior races. The Zephyrians had trade partnerships with 30 civilizations. As fighting spread across 4 star systems, old friends were forced to choose sides. Meanwhile, other problems were growing across the galaxy. On New Shanghai, a trading hub that served 15 different species, Coordinator Wymish faced a crisis that would have been simple to solve a year ago. 2 cargo ships had arrived at the same time, one from the individualistic Terran Confederates and one from the collective-minded Hive worlds. Both captains claimed the same docking bay. In the past, Wymish would have called the Human Cultural Advisor. Sarah Kim had worked at New Shanghai for 8 years, and she understood exactly how to handle conflicts between species with completely different ways of thinking. But Sarah Kim was gone. Like all the other humans, Wymish tried to solve the problem himself using standard procedures. He told both captains to follow docking regulations and assign them bays in order of arrival. This seemed logical and fair. The Confederates' captain was furious because the individual who had arrived first wasn't being treated as most important. The Hive World's captain was confused because the group needs of his entire species weren't being considered. Above individual timing dot within an hour. Both captains were sending angry messages to their governments. Within a day, both the Confederate Assembly and the Hive World's Council were filing complaints with the Galactic Trade Commission. Within a week, New Shanghai had lost its trading licenses for both civilizations. Similar problems erupted across the galaxy. The University of Comparative Sciences lost half its funding when research partnerships collapsed due to cultural misunderstandings. 3 major medical conferences were canceled because species couldn't work together without human coordinators to bridge their differences. The economic impacts started small but grew quickly. The Galactic Trade Index dropped 5% in the first month after the human departure. By the 4th month, it had fallen 20%. Companies that had relied on human translators and cultural advisors found themselves unable to maintain partnerships with alien businesses. But the worst problems were diplomatic. Council archives showed a disturbing pattern. In the 3 centuries since humans had joined, major galactic conflicts had become increasingly rare. The Council had credited this success to improved procedures and the wisdom of elder species. Now, Counselor HFY was discovering the truth as she reviewed historical records. In almost every case where a potential war had been prevented, humans had been involved. Not as leaders or decision-makers, but as the ones who found creative solutions that nobody else had seen. Elena Vasquez had prevented the Helix Wars by realizing that the conflict was really about competing cultural definitions of property ownership. James Morrison had stopped the Trade Federation crisis by understanding that one species' generous gift-giving was accidentally insulting another species' pride. Rachel Chun had ended the colonial uprising by finding a compromise that let both sides feel victorious. Hundreds of smaller conflicts had been resolved the same way. Humans would listen to all sides, understand what each group really needed, and find solutions that satisfied everyone. Other species saw this as simple translation work, but the archives revealed it was much more than that. Chairman HFY reported to Zorthek during a private meeting, "Our analysis shows concerning trends. Human departure correlates with an 847% increase in unresolved diplomatic incidents." Zorthek, as mental presence, flickered with irritation. Correlation is not causation. The humans left during a period of increased galactic tensions. Their absence did not cause these problems. Sir, the data suggests otherwise. In the past 6 months, we have failed to prevent conflicts that humans successfully resolved in similar circumstances for centuries. The humans provided useful services, Zorthek admitted reluctantly, but they were not irreplaceable. We simply need time to adapt our methods. But adaptation was proving difficult. The Council's traditional approaches worked well when all parties shared similar cultural frameworks. Ethereals could use telepathic influence on species that respected mental superiority. Archivists could cite precedents for civilizations that valued tradition. Nexari could present logical arguments to beings that prioritized rational thought. The problem came when species with completely different values had to work together. Warrior cultures that prized honor couldn't understand peaceful species that valued life above victory. Collective-minded civilizations couldn't relate to individualistic societies that put personal freedom above group harmony. Humans had been the bridge between these different worldviews. They could understand honor-based thinking well enough to explain it to peace-loving species. They could translate collective needs into terms that individualistic cultures could accept. They found ways to make natural enemies into working partners. Without that bridge, the Council was discovering that many of their greatest diplomatic successes had been built on very shaky foundations. The crisis came to a head when the Nexari Collective accused the Archivists of historical manipulation thought it started as a minor disagreement about trade regulations. The archivists claimed that certain shipping restrictions had historical precedent dating back 2,000 years. The Nexari ran computer analysis and found errors in the historical data. In the past, human mediators would have helped both species understand that their conflict was really about different approaches to truth and knowledge. The archivists valued wisdom from experience and tradition. The Nexari trusted only data that could be verified and calculated. Both approaches were valuable, and humans had always helped the two species appreciate each other's strengths. Elena Vasquez had once said that the archivists and Nexari were like two different types of memory, one that remembered meaning, and one that remembered facts. But Elena was gone, and no one else understood how to bridge the gap between tradition-based and logic-based thinking. The argument escalated quickly. The Nexari accused the archivists of deliberately lying about historical data. The archivists claimed that the Nexari were too primitive to understand the deep truths preserved in their records. Within days, both species were threatening to withdraw from the council entirely. "This cannot be allowed," Zorthik told his emergency advisors. "If we lose the archivists and the Nexari, the council's authority will collapse." "Perhaps," suggested his aide, "we should contact the humans, ask for their assistance in resolving this crisis." Zorthik's mental presence flared with angry pride. "The council does not beg for help from species we have dismissed. We are the elder races of the galaxy. We do not need humans to solve our problems." But even as he spoke, Zorthik knew he was lying. The past 6 months had been a series of disasters that were getting worse instead of better. Every attempt to use traditional council methods had failed. Species were losing trust in each other and in the council's ability to maintain peace. Late that night, when his advisors had gone home, Zorthik sat alone in his office and did something he had never done before. He searched the council archives for Elena Vasquez's personnel files. What he found shocked him. Elena had a degree in xenopsychology from Earth's most prestigious university. She spoke 43 galactic languages fluently and could communicate basically in 70 more. She had spent 15 years studying alien cultures before becoming an ambassador. Her psychological profiles showed remarkable abilities in pattern recognition, emotional intelligence, and creative problem-solving. More disturbing were her performance reviews. Every council department that had worked with Elena gave her the highest possible ratings. Military advisors called her the most gifted strategic thinker we have encountered. Scientific researchers described her as capable of finding connections between seemingly unrelated concepts. Even ethereal psychologists admitted that her understanding of alien psychology was unprecedented for a non-telepathic species. Zorthik realized with growing horror that Ellen, the first time Chairman Zorthik saw Nexus Prime burning, he thought it was a nightmare. He stood at his office window, watching explosions light up the night sky. Keth warships were attacking the orbital defense platforms while Zephyrian vessels bombed military targets on the planet's surface. The war that had started as a minor border dispute 18 months ago now reached into the heart of Council space. But this wasn't the worst news. The worst news had arrived that morning in the form of a joint declaration from 47 species. They were leaving the Council. Not temporarily, not in protest, but permanently. They no longer trusted the Council's ability to maintain peace or solve problems. "How many does that make?" Zorthik asked his aide. "Unit 9847. One of the few Nexari who still worked for the Council government. 133 species have formally withdrawn. Unit 9847 reported with mechanical sadness. Another 250 have stopped participating in Council sessions." Effective council membership has dropped to less than 50% of original levels. Zorthik felt something he had never experienced before: complete failure. In 18 months, the galactic government that had lasted over 1,000 years was dying. Wars raged across 12 sectors. Trade networks had collapsed. Research partnerships were broken. Ancient alliances had shattered into mutual hatred. And it all started when the humans left. Sir, Unit 9847 continued. The archivists have requested one final meeting before they officially withdraw from the council. They wish to present their historical analysis of current events. Zorthik nodded wearily. At least the archivists were being polite about abandoning the council. Most species just sent angry messages and stopped attending meetings. The final council session took place in a chamber that was mostly empty. Where once hundreds of species had gathered, now only 23 representatives sat in the vast space. The sound of their voices echoed sadly off empty walls. Councilor HFY stood at the center of the chamber, her crystal body reflecting the dim lights like a broken rainbow. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries of accumulated knowledge. Fellow council members, she began, the archivists have completed our analysis of the current galactic crisis. Our findings are disturbing. Holographic displays activated around the chamber, showing historical data, statistical charts, and timeline graphics. The information was overwhelming, but the conclusion was simple and horrible. In the past 3 centuries, HFY explained, the Council successfully prevented approximately 400 potential conflicts between member species. Our records showed that human representatives were directly involved in resolving 384 of these incidents. The numbers appeared in the air above everyone's heads. War after war that had never happened because humans found creative solutions. Trade disputes that never escalated because humans understood what each side really needed. Cultural misunderstandings that never became permanent hatreds because humans could translate between completely different ways of thinking. The pattern is consistent across all categories of conflict. HFY continued. Military, economic, territorial, cultural, and resource-based disputes. In every case where peaceful resolution occurred, human mediation was a significant factor. Zorthik felt his mental presence growing cold with horror. Are you saying that humans prevented 400 wars? Not prevented, HFY corrected. Solved before they became wars. The humans did not stop conflicts that were already happening. They identified situations that would become conflicts and found solutions before violence began. The chamber was completely silent as the full meaning sank in. The council had not been keeping peace through wise leadership or sophisticated procedures. They had been keeping peace because humans were quietly solving problems that the elder species never even noticed. Furthermore, HFY continued relentlessly. Our analysis shows that human departure directly correlates with current crisis escalation. Every major conflict now destroying the galaxy follows patterns that humans successfully addressed in previous centuries. She changed the holographic display to show current battles. The Keth-Zephyrian War matches the structure of the Helix conflict of 2387, which humans resolved through cultural honor protocols. The Ethereal Coalition crisis mirrors the Mental Freedom Wars of 2391, which humans ended by establishing telepathic consent frameworks. Each comparison was like a knife in Zorthik's consciousness. Problems that humans had solved with careful diplomacy and creative thinking were now burning across star systems because no one else knew how to handle them. The conclusion is unavoidable, HFY said quietly. The Galactic Harmony Council's success was built on human diplomatic abilities that we never understood or appreciated. Without humans, we cannot maintain galactic peace. The few remaining council members sat in stunned silence. They had spent their lives believing they were the wise rulers of a great civilization. Now they discovered they had been nothing more than a fancy front for human peacemakers working behind the scenes. Counselor Thranks of the Mindweavers spoke first. "Can we contact the humans? Request their return?" "We have been trying for 16 months, Zorthik admitted. All human space communication channels respond with polite messages saying that humanity is no longer part of the Council and has no obligation to involve itself in Council affairs." "What about informal contact?" asked Unit 9847. "Personal relationships between individuals?" "Severed," Zorthik replied bitterly. "Every human who worked with the Council has cut all ties. They will not respond to messages, invitations, or pleas for help." That night, as explosions continued to light up the sky around Nexus Prime, Zorthik made one final desperate attempt. He sent a priority message directly to Elena Vasquez using his personal diplomatic codes. "Elena," he wrote, abandoning formal protocol, "we were wrong. We need your help. The galaxy is falling apart. Please respond." The answer came back within an hour. It was brief, formal, and devastating. "Chairman Zorthik, thank you for your message. I am no longer Ambassador Elena Vasquez of the Galactic Harmony Council. I am now Director of Interspecies Relations for the Human Colonial Alliance. Per Council Resolution 2847, humanity has no official relationship with the Council and cannot provide assistance with Council matters. I wish you well in resolving your difficulties. Elena Vasquez, Ph.D., Director of ISR." Attached to the message was a news report that made Zorthik's defeat complete. The report described the New Terra Accords, a peaceful cooperation agreement between humanity and 73 species who had left the Council. The human colonies were thriving as independent worlds worked together through voluntary partnerships instead of centralized government. The report included interviews with former Council species who were now working with humans in their new alliance. They described careful negotiations, creative problem-solving, and respectful treatment of cultural differences. Everything the Council claimed to provide, but actually delivered. "The humans never tried to control us," said Harmony of Distant Stars. "The former is a Freean Council representative. They help us understand each other and find solutions that work for everyone. This is what we hoped the Council would be." The report concluded with a statement from Elena Vasquez. "Humanity is committed to peaceful cooperation with all species who share our values of mutual respect and voluntary association. We have no interest in governing others, but we are always willing to help neighbors work together." Reading between the lines, Zorthik understood the real message. The humans hadn't just left the Council. They had built something better. Species were choosing to work with humans instead of staying in the failing Council system. The final blow came 1 week later. The Nexari Collective, the Archivist Consortium, and 31 other species sent a joint declaration to the Council. They were formally joining the Human Colonial Alliance as independent partners. "We no longer recognize the authority of the Galactic Harmony Council," the declaration read. "We choose to work with beings who value cooperation over control, understanding over authority, and peace over pride." On his last day as chairman of the Galactic Harmony Council, Zorthik walked through the empty corridors of the government building. Most of the staff had already left. The few remaining species were packing up their offices and preparing to return to their home worlds. The great council chamber stood empty and dark. Dust was already beginning to gather on the abandoned desks and equipment. In 18 months, a 1,000-year-old galactic government had collapsed completely. Zorthik stood in the center of the chamber where Elena Vasquez had given her final presentation. He remembered her calm voice as she explained how to prevent the war that had ultimately destroyed everything. He remembered his arrogant dismissal of her primitive anxiety. Now he understood the truth. Elena hadn't been anxious or primitive. She had been the most sophisticated diplomatic mind in the galaxy, trying to save a civilization that was too proud to listen. As Zorthek prepared to leave Nexus Prime forever, he received one final message. It came from Elena Vasquez, sent through official channels of the Human Colonial Alliance. Chairman Zorthek, the message read, I have learned that you are leaving Council space. I wanted you to know that the Human Colonial Alliance main